Okay, so let's proceed with the swap function. And generally, what we've said about functions is that we may think of them as some certain people with certain functionalities. Or basically, we can think of every function as some sort of room or a lab which is responsible for the accomplishment of some task. For example, we can see here that we have the driver, which is responsible for driving, the painter, the cooker, and so on, right? These are mainly our function, our analogy to functions. And we also said that we can think of the main function as our current room, as our main room. And in this main room, we have two variables called a and b, which are just two boxes with the names a and b, with the labels a and b. And these two boxes sit in the main room, okay? We have the main room, the main function, and both of these variables just sitting there. And also, we've said that there is a swap function, or we can say there is another room called swap, that there sits some guy who is responsible for the swap functionality between given two numbers that are entered to this swap room. And the way we pass, in this example, the two values from the main room to the swap room is accomplished not by sending these boxes, the boxes themselves, A and B, we do not send them, but rather we're just sending their values, a copy of their values. For example, 5 and 7, like we can see here if we initialize them to these values. So by saying just sending their values, what we mean is simply sending some copy of these values. So think of it this way. If you would like to use the swap function in the example we've seen previously, then when you call the swap function, you would open the door of the other room, of the swap room, which is responsible for all the swapping functionality, and you will not take the two boxes you have here in the main function and pass them to the swap room. You just won't take the boxes, but rather what you will do is just opening the door and screaming that the two values that should be changed are just 5 and 7, okay? So you just pass by value, just a copy of these values, but not the boxes themselves. You see the difference? And that's called passing by value. So once again, you from the main room, you just scream the two values inside boxes A and B. And the swap function hears what you scream to it, okay? So I hear that the two numbers are 5 and 7, and I store them inside of my two local variables, num1 and num2, which are part of our swap room. So the swap function does not know anything about the variables in the main function. It doesn't even know that they exist. He just in the swap room takes a copy of them. So I hope that's clear. And now let's take a look at how the swap functionalities, the swap function will work in this case. Okay. So what happens inside of the swap function is something like this. We create a temp variable, we swap the values between the boxes of num1 and num2, and everything seems to be working as expected, right? You can even try and print the values of num1 and num2 inside of the swap function, and you will see that they were swapped as expected. But, and here comes the big but, you can clearly see that the variables a and b in the main function remains the same. They didn't change at all. And basically that's something that we didn't want, right? We wanted to change a and b. We didn't want to change num1 and num2 inside of some swap room. We wanted to see the result in the main room, that A and B were swapped. And at first glance, if we take, for example, the swap function, we think to ourselves that both of the variables should change. But as we've said previously, we are passing to the swap function, we are just passing a copy of these values of A and B, and not the variables themselves, not the boxes themselves. Then it means that we do not take these boxes A and B and swap between their content. We are just working with a copy of its content of 5 and 7, and it doesn't matter for A and B in the main function. So variables A and B remain untouched. So let's take another look at the swap function, and try to understand maybe a little bit further for what's going on here, and maybe what should we do in this case. Maybe the pointers may help us, perhaps, right? We are in the pointer sections. So let's see what we have here. So the code will look like this, okay? So we have the void swap, okay? The function does not return anything, it just gets two values and it stores them inside of num1 and num2, creates a temp variable to assist in the swap functionality, and then it does all its necessary things. So what we expect, once again, just to emphasize it, what we expect, it doesn't work clearly, but what we want and what we expect that the function will do is that we send it the variables a and b, and it will return us these variables. It will make somehow that the values in these two variables were changed from 5 to 7 and from 7 to 5, okay? And just by using this approach that we have here, that we've seen here, simply won't work. And that's exactly when pointers enter the game. So what we want to do is to pass the variables a and b themselves, or at least a way to access them directly, and not just a copy of their values, right? Because if we want to change them, then what we have to do is give some way to access them, the real boxes, and not just a copy of a and b. And what is that we know about variables that can really help us to identify them? And you're right, and we can see it right here on the screen. Something special about variables, something unique, is their address. And an address is some unique place in the memory of your computer where the variable itself resides. So that's a great way to access a given variable just by knowing where it sits, okay? It's just like where you live, okay? We can access where you live because we know your address. So similarly, we can access variables in the memory of your computer just by using their address, okay? You should already know it by now, but I'm just making a quick reminder. And that summarizes that if at any point and any time we know the address of a variable, we can basically directly access it and modify it however we like. Doesn't matter where we are accessing it from. For example, in the main function, in the swap function, as long as we do it kind of legally, all right? So what we want to do is, instead of calling the swap function and passing it a copy of the values, which we've seen previously that it brings us pretty much nowhere, what we would like to do is to pass the address of every variable, to pass the address of variable A and to pass the address of variable B. And by doing so, the swap function will receive addresses of the specified variables, and then just by knowing the address of where some variable resides, we will use the concept of pointers to access a given address and to do some things just at this address, to access these variables through their address. Is that clear? And I know this concept is not so easy at first, but once you know the difference between these two approaches, by sending by value and by reference, which we are going to talk in this section, pointers will just become a piece of cake for you, okay? It will be so easy once you understand the logic and the core behind what's happening in your computer's memory and how you store values which hold addresses of other variables, which what we are exactly doing right now. I think that once you get this whole idea, maybe watch this video also twice just to emphasize and to make sure you got everything that we said, because as I said previously, it's not so easy when you hear this topic for the first time, okay? So now let's take another look and see how it works. So we have the main function, okay, and we have our two variables a and b. Both of them store some value. A stores 5 as a value, b stores 7 as a value. Think of it as just, I don't know, shoes, the amount of shoes inside of these variables. And also we know we have this label of address A and address B. We also have an associated address where these variables reside in the memory of your computer. So in the swap function, we have two parameters. Let's call them pnum1 and pnum2. These variables, what they have to do is simply to receive and store an address, okay? They will receive and store an address that we pass to them, okay? They will hold addresses inside of them as their value. That's something new. We didn't talk about it in the previous sections. And then when we pass the addresses to pnum1 and pnum2, okay, they will be held as values, and they will know, okay, they will know where the variables a and b are stored, okay? They will know how to access these variables just by saying, okay, I know where they reside, I can also access them, okay? Makes sense. So by pointing to them, by pointing through pnum1 and pnum2, two variables a and b, which are inside of the main function, so just by pointing from the swap function to the main function variables, we will be able simply to modify the content itself inside of these variables a and b. That's just awesome, guys. You don't know how many topics, how many structures, programs, courses are built just on this understanding of pointers. So these pnum1 and pnum2 parameters that the swap function has are of a special type, let's call it this way, because they do not hold standard integer or a floating point type or some other value that we learned in the previous videos. It simply stores an address. So they hold addresses that in these addresses reside some values. For example, 5 and 7 in a and b, and pnum1 holds the address of a, and pnum2 holds the address of b. They simply point somewhere, and that's exactly why they are called pointers, okay? So I hope this animated and visualized explanation is clear to you guys. I don't think that a lot of teachers really teach this tough topic, and that's a hell of a tough topic. I don't think that a lot of teachers teach it this way, and in my experience, in my opinion, that's why students are struggling to understand what is pointers and why we can use them. But I think that this is the best approach to understand what's going on behind the scenes, and not just to quit because it's too difficult to grasp at first. So I hope that's clear, because it's very important that you understand the topic. It's the basis for the advanced sections, and basically a lot of things are going to be built upon it. And this is it for this video, guys. The screen is black. We are over with this video. I'll see you in the next one. Have a nice day.